Okay, so it's late. I'm not going to make this one very long, but I think it will be useful for anyone visiting China as an outsider, whether you be working here and you want to travel around the country or whether you are a tourist. And that is about hotels in China. I've had quite a lot of experience with this, so I feel I'm in a relatively good position to comment. Um, like any country, there's a variation of the type of hotels. I have stayed in a hostel, I've stayed in a cheap hotel, and I've stayed in semi-luxury hotels. So I've had quite a mixed experience. And I'll start with my most recent experience just before the new year. I was in the city of Zhengzhou up in Henan province. Zhengzhou is an ancient city. It's said to be the birthplace of the Yellow Emperor. I wasn't there for very long. I met a friend, and she had already booked a hotel for me, which was very kind of her. So after dinner, we went to this hotel, and on the surface, it looked like an average hotel. It didn't look either very good or very run down. It was just an average hotel. It looked friendly enough. It looked warm enough. And then they turned around and said that I couldn't stay. Now, I wasn't overly surprised. I was irritated, but not overly surprised because I've experienced this before. And this is the thing you need to be very wary of. If you're a foreign national, there are many lower end of the scale hotels in China that simply won't let you stay. Now, it would be tempting to say this is discrimination, but it sort of is, yet it is for a kind of ironic reason. What I mean by that is it's discriminatory in that they're discriminating, they won't let foreigners stay, but they're kind of doing it for our own sake, in the sense that they have this idea that those hotels don't match the, I suppose, safety standards. Although looking around, I saw a fire extinguisher and it looked, I didn't see any faulty electricity. It looked on the surface, at least, to be pretty decent. So they have this situation. I don't know the full background, but basically they're not allowed to let foreigners stay, and it can be a fine of up to 10,000 RMB, which is a pretty hefty amount of money if someone was to come in and see a foreigner staying there. And I think it comes down to this cultural thing about face. So if there was a tragedy, let's say a fire, and let's say I perished, right? Or you as a foreigner were badly injured, I think the mindset is it would make them look bad. Now, I don't know if there was some incidents that actually triggered this, whether, I don't know, maybe foreigners got robbed in hotels, maybe they died in hotels. I really don't know. But it is something you need to be aware of if you're booking into a lower end of the scale hotel. What I would do is, if you speak to them on the phone, tell them that you're a foreigner, so that you have an upfront information. And if they reject you, then at least you know in advance. But in my case, like I said, it was my friend that booked me in, and she didn't mention that because she hadn't thought of that. Now, what irritated me about the situation, I wasn't overly surprised that they rejected me, but when she tried to get her money back, and she didn't tell me the exact price, I think it was 180 RMB. So we're not talking a hostel, we're talking a hotel. They wouldn't give it back because they said they something about not having enough stars. In other words, they weren't prestigious enough to give her compensation, even though they'd taken her money. And I was irritated on her behalf. I didn't lose anything. My friend paid, and I felt really bad for her. I offered to pay her this money because she'd obviously lost out. I mean, I was going to pay her anyway, but the fact that she'd, I mean, that just was ridiculous to me. It's one thing if they have to abide by the rules, but to actually refuse compensation is just plain, I think it's just greedy. And I don't know what the rationale for that was. Um, I'd like to name and shame the hotel because I think it's disgraceful, but I don't know what they were called. Just a hotel in Zhengzhou city centre. Anyway, my friend checked me in then to, it was called a five-star hotel. I'd say it was more like a four-star hotel. It was pretty comfortable, very elegant, very nice facade, interior. and there was no problems there. I stayed the night. But just back to this point about being refused as a foreigner, I've experienced that before. 5 years ago, I tried to get a hotel in Guangzhou. My company phoned up various hotels, and they all said the same thing: you can't stay, ostensibly for the same reason. So I don't get it. It's something to do, like I say, with this precaution that if something happened, they don't want to lose face. By, obviously it would bring them into disrepute, like a foreigner had died at this hotel. It's discriminating in the sense that we're not allowed to stay, but it's kind of insulting to Chinese people as well, because it's almost like their life is less valuable. I don't know. It's just, to me, it's a very strange rule, and I can't comprehend it, especially in a country. I mean, China, I believe, is something like the second or third most visited country in the world by international tourists. It's certainly in the top 10. So you would think that they would be a bit more flexible in terms of letting people stay. Now, I have to say, I've never, slept rough or anything like that. I've always something's always worked out. But just be aware of this. You may have to spend a bit more money and just go to a higher scale hotel because it might be the only place that accepts you. And like I say, it's irritating because the thing about the higher scale hotels, like anywhere, you pay for what you get. They are higher scale. They're luxurious. The beds are very comfortable. The rooms are very plush. Personally, I find them a little bit cold. I don't think they have the warmth of a smaller establishment. Um, I've stayed in Shanghai and Zhengzhou. In both cases, I found the reception a little bit cold and just not very welcoming. I mean, to be fair, it was my friends doing most of the talking, but I don't know. I just didn't get a very good vibe from the body language, and that might seem like nitpicking, but I feel, put it this way, if I was running a company, I would ensure that my staff were welcoming. Now, I have to say, on both occasions when I left, it was a bit different. They were more friendly, but I don't know what it was. To me, body language is important in public service industry, is very important. So I didn't get a very good vibe, but I can't complain. My friends sorted this out for me, so I had a place to stay for the night. Many people don't, so I'm not complaining, but just it's an observation. Um, I stayed in a hostel in Hangzhou. Now, I have to say, they were very amicable. They were decent people. Um, they didn't all speak English. One lady at the reception had a decent level of English, so she could help with maps and so on. But this comes back actually to the point I made about warmth in higher end hotels. I wanted to know, like, well, which bus connections can I get to the city centre or to the train station? Now, okay, fair enough. If they don't know, they don't know. But the receptionist's attitude in this four-star hotel was just very kind of dismissive, like, oh, I don't know. And she just didn't seem to want the help in any regard. And that wasn't a very good impression for a four-star hotel. The hostel, on the other hand, is a hostel. I stayed with four other guys, but very warm people, very friendly. They served a very nice breakfast, just as good, by the way, as these four-star hotels that I stayed in. And I mean, it's small, it's a hostel, but I've stayed in a hostel in London, and this hostel was far warmer in the sense that they had nice decorations. It was very homely. Um, but just a brief word about that. It's called the Westlake Hostel Majalong branch in Hangzhou. Now, Hangzhou is a big city, and the Westlake area is a big area. There's several hostels in that area with similar names, and if my friend wasn't with me, I don't think I would have found it. But I would say pretty good things about them. I mean, you're sharing with people, but that's a hostel, and I would say it was one of the better experiences I've had in China in terms of staying in places. I did stay in one lower end hotel in Shanghai. What had happened, this was 5 years ago, I was going to a friend's wedding, and for the first 2 nights, my friends paid for me a really nice fancy hotel. Um, but then the last night I was there, I was relocated to another hotel, and that was fine. It was obviously the lower end of the scale. Sometimes, personally, I prefer a slightly lower end of the scale. What I want is Wi-Fi and a shower. Now, why I say that is I smoke. some of the big hotels, they're a bit fussy about things like that. And, I'm not complaining. I respect rules in that sense. But it's sort of ironic because in China, smoking is one rule, and I'm going to make a video about this that people generally ignore. But when I was in Zhengzhou, I didn't want to risk it because they had a little fire alarm, they had a sprinkler. So, suppose safety wise, full points for that. But I just found I couldn't quite relax in the same way that I would maybe in a lower end hotel. Um, I mean, the downside, of course, to a hostel is there's no privacy. That goes without saying. Um, I mean, there was no issues with the guys I was staying with. Just you can't do things in a hostel that you would do in a hotel. So I think what I'm driving at is if I were to have the choice, I would probably go for something like a three-star hotel. I find the very top end of the scale lacks warmth. The very bottom end of the scale lacks things that you might want. The middle of the scale is probably the best, but in China, sometimes, like I say, they just won't let foreigners stay. The night before in Kaili, a colleague of mine tried to check me into a hotel. It was the same situation. They brought me to the room, they gave me the key, and then we went to the reception to try and get the Wi-Fi. And then the boss came out, and no, I couldn't stay. And I'd heard about this, and I wasn't overly surprised. Now that place, to be fair, was a little ramshackle. The floors were uneven. There were a few wires sticking out. I did get a slightly uneasy vibe about it. But one night I would gladly have stayed there. I mean, especially with the snow we've been having here recently. So, summed up, if you are traveling to China, if you're a tourist, do research first. Don't just hope for potluck and go into the nearest hotel because they do have this very strange rule. They just won't let foreigners stay unless it's a higher end of the market. Now, if you want to go for the higher end of the market, if you can afford it, and incidentally, the prices are very affordable by Western standards. So, a 4 or 5 star hotel in the bigger cities might be around 290, 300 per night, which is about £29. So it's very reasonable. I have no complaints about the prices. Um, the breakfast in the 4 star hotel, as I believe it should be in Zhengzhou, was not great. It was cold and the tables weren't really cleared. It was very busy and you were sort of piled on top of other people. I didn't really like that. I found the breakfast a little bit plastic, and I don't often complain about food. But I have to say, my best experiences probably, ironically, were at the hostel. Although I wouldn't necessarily have wanted to stay there a very long time, and at the lower end hotel. Now, don't get me wrong, I like comfort, and the bigger hotels, you get a nice shower. They're very luxurious. But they also have, if you open up the visitor book, they have some strange rules like no bad content on the internet. They're not talking about pornography. They're talking about basically dissenting websites and so on. I suppose the IP address would get the hotel into trouble, but I just feel that some of those higher end hotels, and it's probably the same in any country, they're almost too. I don't know. I guess I feel the same way about it as I would in a very fancy hotel. Excuse me, a very fancy restaurant. I just feel a little bit like there's a lack of homeliness there. I like somewhere where you can even know someone on a first name basis. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about, um, a bit of luxury is nice, of course it is. But for me, I like that happy medium. And unfortunately, in China, it's hard to get that because, like I say, they have this rule. The hostels don't have that rule because they're hostels. But lower end hotels, they just won't let foreigners stay. And it's really a pity um, because I think they would probably be, for me personally, the happy medium. Okay, if you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer. That's my honest experience. Certainly, I don't want to put anyone off. This is a great country to visit, and I've never been homeless. Friends have always helped me out in terms of getting somewhere, but just be aware of that. It's a very strange rule, and I can't get my head around it. Like I said, I think it's something to do with safety, but why do they deem our lives to be more than Chinese lives? Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but it just seems very strange to me. Okay. Feel free to ask questions and thanks for watching.